An Affliction of the Heart by Anonymous Pegasus. Chapter 6. Gift. Warren sat in awkward silence, watching the changeling at the other end of the table. Kuna was quite happily eating her half of a loaf of bread, picking the best bits out of the stew and downing it with the stew as well. She seemed completely oblivious to exactly how uncomfortable Warren was. The Pegasus had retreated to his room for a few minutes, and then returned with his spear and armor equipped, sitting warily at one end of the table. Kuno had taken her usual spot, sans the tether and collar, and without the restraint. Seemed at least 8 times more dangerous and intimidating than before.
So, aren't you going to ask me stuff?
Kuno asked, raising an eyebrow at the Pegasus with a sly grin. Warren tightened his grip on the spear, even though he knew deep down that if he came to actually using it, he wouldn't be able to.
Why would I do that? Well, I know your history now, but you know nothing of mine. We were apparently going to try and make me a goody two-shoes, so let's forget for a moment that I need to feed on love. We'll just skim over the impossibility of you finding a way to provide free love, and we'll move into you turning me nice. Obviously, the starting point would be to get groundworks for my personality, yes?
Kuno tilted her head slightly to the side, chewing another piece of bread. Warren frowned at that, glowering at her from under his helmet. I guess?
Well,
Kuno asked, brows raising.
don't be shy now.
How many ponies have you killed? Warren asked bluntly, pursing his lips. Kuno giggled softly at that.
Right to the hard questions, huh?
Yeah, like you were gonna answer anyway, Warren said dismissively, snorting and turning his head.
3.
Kuno stated dismissively. Warren made a soft choking sound.
What? Too many?
Kuno asked casually, an ear perking at the Pegasus. You've killed ponies, Warren said weakly.
Yep, 3 of them.
Kuno reiterated.
And? You asked the question?
Who were they? Warren whispered weakly.
Well, the first one was an accident. Definitely my fault, though. I was trying to get into a hospital to imitate a cancer patient and garner a little extra love back in my homeland. But while I was masquerading as a nurse, I was required to treat a patient, and I prescribed diazepam for a weak heart disorder. Apparently that's not much of a good mix. The pony died. Number 2 was also an accident. I'd knocked out a dominatrix pony so I could take her place and leech love from one of her suitors, as it were. When the pony dropped the ball, I didn't know that this was the sign for me to release him from his asphyxiation restraints. By the time that I realized for his pleas for me to stop were, well, genuine and not his submissive rape fantasy, he went unconscious. I tried to revive him, but he never started breathing again.
Warren stared at the changeling, mouth open, shocked and dismayed.
What?
Kuno said defensively, her ears playing back.
I tried to revive him.
And the third? Warren murmured, half afraid of the answer. Kuno's gaze hardened.
A high-class unicorn I came into contact with. It was a month before I figured out he was a major player in the slavery ring. His cronies would go around to different orphanages, adopt the children, and sell them off for literally anything.
Warren stared at her aghast. Right here in Equestria? Kuno shook her head.
Nope, back home, across the ocean. I was forced to leave the country because the unicorn's cronies figured out I was a changeling. I suppose I was found, covered in blood in my true form, with a salad fork shoved through his eye socket. But I digress.
The Pegasus could only continue to stare, speechless. After several long moments, Warren found his voice again. What did you kill him for? Kuno gave a giggle at that, shaking her head.
I killed him because he was an absolute lousy lay.
Warren could only continue to stare. Really?
No.
Kuno shook her head with a snicker before sombering.
I killed him because he was trafficking orphan foals to some really, really horrible ponies.
But, Warren frowned deeply.
But what? You think it's impossible for me to feel empathy for ponies?
Kuno accused, frowning in response. Warren shook his head. Just... You make yourself out to be heartless. Then you go and kill some pony because he was trafficking young ponies.
No, I didn't make myself out to be heartless.
Kuno stated, pointing at the Pegasus with a piece of bread.
You just assume that I'm heartless.
You threatened to kill me casually. That is heartless, Warren responded with a huff.
The easiest way to garner information in an interrogation is to either cause grievous bodily harm and threaten more, or make future of the interrogation subject questionable. If you know you're going to die anyway, then why bother telling me? Whereas if you know that I won't kill you, the knowledge will fortify you.
Kuno explained calmly, matter-of-factly. I really have nothing to say to that, Warren responded with a slow shake of his head, eyes wide.
Torture 101?
Kuno said with a cheery smile. What the fuck are you? Warren asked after a moment, his tone exasperated.
I'm a changeling,
Kuno replied, puffing out her chest with a grin.
Isn't it awesome?
Kuno sat outside for the first time in days, basking in the sunlight and just enjoying the fresh air. The sun was setting in the west, slowly dipping below the horizon. Warren was in the garden, where he had been since before Kuno had come outside. His spear was on the ground beside him, just out of reach, but close enough for him to grab it should the changeling suddenly launch herself at him. The changeling's happy reverie was mildly disturbed by the night constant ache in her wings. She still hadn't finished healing yet, and even though Warren's affection for her was helping in some small way, it would be days before she felt 100%. Idly, Kuno watched the Pegasus working. He was using his hooves to arrange and delicately place creeping vines in place, so that they grew evenly up over a trestle. He had non-edible vines, tomato vines, pumpkins, melons, any kind of vine Kuno could think of, and some she didn't even recognize. He even used his wings to help arrange them, allowing him to work at an astounding pace.
Why don't you eat any of the stuff you grow?
Kuno queried, curious. None of it's ripe yet, Warren pointed out with a slight frown. I mean, you could eat the unripened stuff, if you want. You'll only be sick for a little while.
Why do you even eat? Do you need to eat? Eating is... well, it's... I have no idea how to explain it to a non-changeling,
Kuno admitted, frowning down at her hoofs.
Love feeds us. Food can sustain us for a little while, but it's never actually enough. For our first years, food is all we require, but once we get a taste for love, food stops working. It stops being sufficient, but it can supplement a love diet. We can certainly go without, but it's bland, I guess.
And if a changeling never feeds on love? Warren asked, looking up from his gardening. Kuno blinked once.
Impossible. They'd have to have no contact with any pony ever, nor their parents, other changelings.
Would a changeling taking love from another changeling be like cannibalism? The Pegasus asked curiously.
Well, not really. It's an equal exchange, though. Give another changeling a week of love, and lose a week of love in response. But that's non-consequential. So, loving rape?
Kuno suggested with a giggle. Loving rape, Warren repeated blankly, before slowly shaking his head. Changelings are weird.
Ponies are weird,
Kuno retorted, snorting once.
If it wasn't for the fact that I need you ponies to survive, I'd have gone and moved off to a nice quiet mountain somewhere already.
What's it like? Warren asked suddenly, looking up at her again. Feeding on love. What's it feel like? Kuno pondered on that, shrugging and scraping one of her large front teeth over the chitin of her front hoof to try and remove a scuff mark.
It's hard to explain. Sort of warm and fuzzy, kind of tingly. Feels a little bit like a liquid, and a little bit like a gas. Sort of like that condensation on the side of a pot when you're boiling water in it. It just sort of coalesces inside you and then spreads across your insides like a warm pool of molten, well, warmth.
That sounds explicit, Warren stated with a slow shake of his head.
Oh, grow up!
Kuno snapped, picking up a stick and tossing it at him. Warren gave an amused snort, grinning at the changeling, and then seemed to catch himself, pausing and blinking, sombering. His ears lowered, and he turned back to his gardening with renewed vigor, biting his bottom lip and looking disgruntled.
Was it something I said?
Kuno asked, unperturbed. It's nothing, Warren responded flatly, digging vigorously with a spade that made a new hole for a vine to be planted in. Kuno giggled softly at that, shaking her head.
Surprised that I made you smile, huh?
Warren paused in his digging, going quiet. It was several moments before he nodded jerkily and then went back to digging. Kuno hummed happily to herself as she scrubbed her chin with a sponge, getting it nice and shiny and liquid black. What's it feel like? Warren asked from the door, staring at her. Your scales or hide or whatever that is.
My carpus?
Kuno asked, peering up at him, a trail of bubbles stuck on her chin.
It's made of chitin, like a bug's, but it's softer and more malleable. Feels kind of like linoleum. You know, before it's pressed to the ground and stepped on all over forever.
Linoleum, Warren repeated blankly. Odd.
You didn't get a feel when you were carrying me back and forth?
Kuno asked, raising her brow slowly. I tried my very hardest not to touch you, Warren admitted, looking away. A soft hum left the changeling.
Out of respect or disgust?
I guess a bit of both, Warren replied with brutal honesty. Kuno nodded reasonably.
Understandable, I guess. Come here, feel for yourself.
The changeling extended a hoof towards the Pegasus. Warren blinked once, his ears pinning back. He shifted his weight awkwardly from hoof to hoof before his curiosity got the better of him. He took a step closer to her and then tentatively lifted a hoof towards her own.
I don't bite.
Kuno chided, shaking her head.
I mean, unless you're into that, then I can make an exception.
The Pegasus jerked his hoof back, glancing at the very toothy smile Kuno was giving him. With a soft shudder of indecision, he quickly reached forward and touched her hoof, poking it once and then withdrawing.
Oh, I should have told you that you'll get infected now. All changelings have little hooked barbs on their chin that carries all sorts of nasty things,
Kuno said matter-of-factly. Warren blinked, his eyes widening as he began to scrub his hoof vigorously against the wall. Kuno dissolved into giggles, falling back into the tub with a splash. The Pegasus realized that she had been messing with him, and ceased rubbing his hoof, shaking his head and glowering at her.
Why did you throw this out?
Kuno asked, her tone annoyed and confused. A slight jingle heralded her approach, and Warren looked up from his bed in the half-dismantled alarm clock that Kuno had smashed. Kuno was holding the collar and bell in an outstretched hoof, scowling. I didn't think you'd appreciate having it lying around, Warren admitted, his ears lowering.
Don't just throw it out.
Kuno scolded, waving the collar at him for emphasis.
It's mine.
Warren blinked once, and then shook his head. Fine, I won't throw it out. What are you, a compulsive hoarder? Kuno frowned, holding the collar at her chest, shaking her head.
No, it's just... I have my reasons.
The Pegasus raised an eyebrow at the changeling again, seeming to pick up on the fact that it was a point upon which she was uncomfortable. And those reasons are? He pressed. Kuno huffed once, looking down at her hooves and frowning deeply.
It's just the first... Well, it's the first thing anyone ever got me.
The first gift you ever got? Warren asked incredulously, shaking his head in disbelief.
I've gotten plenty of gifts,
Kuno retorted, huffing once.
Just none of them that were for me. For Kuno. They were always for the ponies I was impersonating.
That is really sad, Warren admitted, frowning deeply before shaking his head. I'd hug you, but I'm afraid you'd eat my tongue or something while I was doing it.
Eyeball,
Kuno corrected with a bright smile.
Much tastier.
Well, that's an image that won't stay with me forever, Warren stated, turning back to the destroyed alarm clock and trying to fix it again. The next time Warren saw Kuno was just as she was getting ready to sleep. The changeling crept into his room as quiet as a whisper, and pulled up the edge of his blanket, nosing underneath it and then worming her way up beside him, snuggling up against its back. The Pegasus stiffened on reflex, eyes going wide. What are you doing?
I'm sleeping in your bed,
Kuno stated matter-of-factly. Warren blinked once at shock and disbelief.
What? You think I'm cute?
Kuno pointed out with a weary yawn, nosing in against his wings curiously.
And snuggling up to you to sleep is quite a cute thing to do, yes? It reinforces your affection for me. I get more love from you, and you get a cute changeling snuggling up to your back. Every pony wins, yes?
Warren pursed his lips, but didn't offer any argument, his form still stiff.
Relax, you stubborn mule, or I'll give you a wing massage with my freaky, hole-filled hoofs.
Kuno threatened, nipping at the leading edge of one of his wings. Warren stiffened further at the nip before he was forced himself to relax. It was a long time after Kuno had drifted off to sleep that the Pegasus found unconsciousness as well.